everyone. Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. Today we're going to talk about spring bear hunting, specifically Western spot and stalk spring bear hunting. Last season, I wrote down some lessons I learned in the field, and if you're new to bear hunting, I think these lessons will really help you out on your hunt. I've never killed a bear before, but I think my perspective as a new bear hunter is actually helpful for other people who are getting out and maybe trying this for the first time. Some of the things that stood out to me might be things that more experienced bear hunters take for granted. That's not to discount their knowledge or skill by any means. I've learned so much from hunters who are better than I am, and you should definitely go listen to the pros as well. But I'm just hoping that by sharing these lessons learned, I can make your bear hunting learning curve a little easier. The first time I went and looked for bears was during the fall in Tennessee a few years ago. I read up on them, learned what bear sign looked like, found an area that people confirmed bears were in, and when I went out to hunt with a buddy, we found one old pile of what might have been bear poop. That was it. I really had no idea what I was doing, but it started a whole new journey of learning about and hunting bears that has been really fun and exciting. Something about bears capture my imagination. There's a few things. Part of it is that they are magnificent, fascinating, beautiful animals. Their habits and preferences and life cycles are so different than other animals, especially other commonly hunted animals, and it makes them stand out in a unique way. Another part of it is that bears love the types of places I really love. One of the things I enjoy about hunting and backpacking is getting to experience beautiful, rugged, remote places. And bears seek those areas out for security, for solitude, for food availability. And so even if I don't see a bear when I'm hunting, I'm likely to end up in some incredible and memorable places. And finally, everybody who's eaten bear meat says it's some of the best meat around. I think it depends on what the bear has been eating, for sure, but most people say it's incredible. I believe I had a bite of bear meat when I was a very little kid, but I haven't had any since. So I'm really looking forward to trying it, and I'd love to get a nice bear hide as well to make a blanket or something for my home. All that to say, I've only been bear hunting for 2 seasons now, but it's really taken a hold of me. I've been looking forward to this season for months. I've been training, I've been reading up, I've been scouting, and hopefully this will be the season I actually kill a bear. So today I want to pass on some of the things I've learned to you. But before we get into it, I want to start with a story of the first bear I ever spotted on purpose. So before I started hunting bears, I had seen them in the wild. I had seen them in Washington near Snoqualmie Pass and also on Mount Rainier. And so I had a few experiences with black bears, but nothing where I had gone out and been looking specifically to find a bear and then found one. So it's one thing to experience animals that you just come across when you're hiking or camping, and that's always fun. But to go out and search for a specific animal and then actually find it is so much more of a challenge, and I think so much more rewarding. So before last bear season, before last spring season, I had never actually gone out looking for a bear and actually found one. So a couple days before the season, I went out to a place that I had e-scouted. I had looked at this area and it was a burn. It had burned a number of years ago, and it had lots of nice south-facing slopes. It had a large stream running through the drainage, and there was a good place that I could drive to and then hike a short ways to sit on a great glassing vantage that allowed me to see for miles. So I went out a couple days before the spring bear season opened, and I went up pretty much as high as I could until the road was covered with snow. And then I hiked on the snow for a ways because I was thinking about finding that snow line. I wanted to know where the snow line was. And I was thinking the bears would be right up next to that snow line, which we'll actually talk about in a minute. It's a little bit different. So I got up high and I was looking, and I got to my glassing vantage at maybe 12 p.m., maybe 1 p.m. And I was just going to stay there until it got dark. Well, it was a warm spring day, and after hiking up that logging road in snow, I was a little bit tired, and I was just sitting out there, and I was starting to get sunburned. And surprisingly, I just wasn't seeing any animals. I saw a sign on my hike in. I looked down and I saw all this burned area and water and south-facing slopes, and I was thinking that this should just be the perfect habitat for animals, and yet I just wasn't seeing anything. So I kept sitting there, I kept looking, I had my spotting scope out, and I was just picking apart areas across the hillsides. I was looking at different elevations. I was trying to look into some pockets of timber just to see anything. I was thinking, surely there's got to be an elk or a deer or something out here. And for hours and hours, I didn't see any animals besides some birds. So I was really surprised, and I was thinking, this looks great on a map. This seems to have all the features that people say bears need, and yet I'm just not seeing anything. One thing I noticed, though, was that even though the snow had melted up pretty high, it was kind of a low snow year, a lot of these slopes that I was looking at were just brown. They didn't have fresh green grass. And the only place that I actually saw green grass was down by the river that was running through the drainage. And so I kept looking down there. I kept thinking, if I were an animal, I was trying to eat green grass, I would probably be down there because there's just not the same food availability higher up like where I am at the snow line. But I checked down there a couple times. I didn't see anything. And everything I had read about bear hunting said to find the snow line and then you'll find bears. Well, thankfully, I had nowhere to be and I had committed to staying there until dark. And really, I had got there too early because I was starting to get tired and it was a long spring day. And by the time when I was actually getting into sort of the prime bear spotting time period, I was starting to get a little bit tired and wanting to move around. I took a hike just a little bit further up the road. It was tough hiking because it's just wet snow at the time. And I went a little bit further up the road and kind of repositioned so I could get a better look at this area that had some green grass. And I was sitting up there and I was there for a couple hours. I went back to my original place. And then finally, in the last 2 hours of daylight, I head back to the place where I could see that area with some green grass pretty well. And I was just sitting there. I would put my binoculars down there every once in a while, see if there was anything. And again, I just saw no animals. I didn't see any elk. I didn't see any deer. And looking back, what was probably happening was I was too high. The animals were probably lower down feeding on green grass, and I just was too high at that time. As much as I believed in the area, I was starting to lose hope, and I was thinking maybe I should head back to the car so I don't have to hike back in the dark, which is something else we'll talk about in a minute here. And I thought, I'm just going to glass these areas one last time. I'm just going to use my binoculars, do a quick scan, and we'll see if there's anything there. So I put my binoculars up to my face and kind of look in that same little pocket that I just kind of subconsciously kept coming back to because it had water, it had green grass, and that looked like a place where animals would be. And lo and behold, through my binoculars, I spot this little rounded black shape. And after looking at stumps for the whole day, it was surprising because I saw that little rounded black bear bottom and I knew immediately it was a black bear. And I freaked out. I was super excited. I looked at it for a second through the binoculars, but then grabbed my spotting scope and immediately tried to get confirmation that that was a black bear. And I wanted a photo of it. So I found where it was, and it was on a south-facing slope just a little bit above where that green patch of grass and the river was. And presumably he had been down there maybe for a good portion of the day, and he started working his way up the slope, slowly just feeding his way up out of that valley. So I got to watch him feeding, and there was about an hour left of light, and I was super excited. It was the first bear that I had ever spotted on purpose. And I also assumed it was a big boar because it was real early in the season. He was the only one out there, and he looked pretty chunky through my glass. It's hard to judge bears and what size they are, but I thought he was a pretty big boar, and that just made it a little bit more exciting for me. After taking some pictures, taking a video, I packed up and hiked back to my truck in the dark. Now, I never saw that bear again. I didn't have a chance to go out on the season opener because I think it was on a Monday and I had to work. But I did go back later to that very little spot where I had seen that green grass. I hiked all the way in there and I found a big pile of fresh bear poop. And I think if I had been able to hunt that area a little bit more, I could have had a chance at a bear. And I'm interested in going back there this season. So that was the first bear I ever spotted on purpose. It kicked off a fun season. I was able to spot one, maybe two more bears. It could have been the same bear. And I learned many lessons along the way. And I want to share some of those with you today. So the first lesson I learned was that green grass is highly important and that it usually grows well below the snow line. So from everything I had read, I knew to target green grass when looking for bears, and they especially prefer that fresh green grass and vegetation. I think about it this way. If you think about baby spinach versus older adult spinach, the baby spinach can make a nice salad. It's somewhat softer, it's a little bit more succulent, but that old spinach is a little bit more fibrous and not as tasty. And I think bears have the same mindset when it comes to new, fresh growth. We call it green up. Those young greens also have a higher nutritional content than older plants. And so bears really key in on that fresh green up. And their elevation throughout the year is determined by that food availability. When you're trying to find bears, it is helpful to find the snow line, but it's more likely that the bears will be 500 to 1,500 feet in elevation below the snow line. And that matches with my limited experience, but I've read this from other sources that are much more experienced than myself. And that makes sense because the snow melts, then it takes a little time for the plants to sprout and green up. And the snow is going to melt faster than those plants sprout and grow. So to condense it down, find the snow line and then look in an elevation band of about 500 to 1,500 feet below the snow line. And that's where you're most likely to find bears. Now, another lesson I learned about green grass is that green on a map doesn't necessarily mean green grass. And what I mean is when I'm looking at Onyx Hunt or a hunting app that has aerial imagery, sometimes you'll see these green slopes. And in my mind, when I was starting out, I thought, oh, that means a nice green grassy slope. But this will save you a lot of time when you're e-scouting. Especially in my area, slopes that grow green grass show up as tan or brown on aerial maps. And this could be for a few different reasons. The aerial imagery could be taken in the summer when the weather is warmer and the grass has died or dried out. You could also be looking at clearings in pine forests that are full of dirt that's brown or dead brown pine needles. And then finally, light green grass plants are very small and they simply just don't show up in as much detail in aerial images. So you may want to figure out what green grass looks like from an aerial view. And you'll just have to go find an area in the place you're hunting that has green grass and then match that up to aerial imagery. But don't just think that the green on the map translates to green grass. I've actually found that in my area, slopes that look green in aerial imagery are almost always chest-high bushes. And there was actually a slope that we were watching when we were bear hunting that had some of these tall bushes, and we saw a moose run into these bushes and then basically disappear and reemerge 100 yards further away. It was wild. It was just tearing downhill through these bushes, and we basically lost sight of it. And then it popped out 100 yards away. So even if we had seen a bear there, it would have been very hard to spot. And those tall bushes actually suck up some of that sunlight and can crowd out the grass that the bears would want to be eating. So just pay attention to what green grass on the ground actually looks like on an aerial map. All right, the next lesson I learned was to hunt the last hours of light, even if you can't shoot something then. And this is something I knew, but I think it's especially important for bear hunting. Both of the bears that I spotted were spotted originally in those last 2 hours of daylight. And in that example that I gave in the beginning, if I hadn't stayed out there until the very evening, I wouldn't have seen any animals at all. So even if you don't want to take a shot in the last hour of daylight or last half hour because you don't feel confident tracking the animal or you don't want to deal with potential predators in the night or whatever it is, right? You should still hunt those hours and be using your binoculars or your spotting scope because that is likely to be your best chance of actually spotting a bear. And even if you spot a bear in the evening and don't have time to make a play on it, you can always watch where it is, mark it on a map, and then come and look for it in the morning and make a play on it then. This next one gave me a lot of trouble, and the lesson learned is that there are no game trails through deadfall. So when I'm looking at a map, a topographical map, and I'm trying to plan my routes and where I might hike, usually I look at the ridges first. And the ridges are usually a good bet because they will be a little bit less steep, and often animals will travel these ridges and create game trails. And so once you get on a good game trail, you can really increase your speed moving around in the mountains. Well, in this area that we were hunting, it had been burned and the ridges were covered in deadfall. And I was thinking about travel routes and thinking that I would just be able to hike along the ridges and edges of these big bowls. And if I needed to access the other side of the bowl, instead of going down and then back up, I could just go along the edge of it. And it would be a 3-mile hike, but 3 miles on a game trail isn't that bad. What I didn't think about, though, was the fact that these ridges were covered in deadfall. And deadfall is super hard to hike through. You're talking trees stacked up like linking logs, giant tangles of old brush, and really, animals can't do much to move these giant trees. So there's not going to be as much of a game trail the way there might be through a healthy living forest. So what ended up happening was we expected to take a route along a ridge that was about 3 miles to another place where we would spend some time glassing, and I expected it to take 1-2 hours max. And it ended up taking us something like 6 hours. It ate up a whole bunch of our day, and we were exhausted when we got to our destination. And it was really just because of poor route planning. So when you're looking at your routes, your potential routes, make sure that you're not trying to hike through tons of deadfall. Or if you are going to hike through deadfall, just account for the amount of time that it's going to take. Another lesson that I learned that relates to this is that snow can seriously change your access and hiking routes. Now, I knew this when it comes to snow on roads. Sometimes you're going to have snow on roads and it's going to make it impossible or very hard to drive them. But I didn't think about it in terms of hiking. One of the areas I hunted pretty early in the season, and I was still under the impression that the bears would be right up hugging the snow line. I hadn't quite figured out that they would actually be pretty far below the snow line. So I was hiking in some of these areas that had deadfall, but there was still a significant amount of snow that filled in the gaps in between the deadfall. So you'd have deadfall built up like linking logs, but in the middle there was still enough snow that I could basically walk over it. And I didn't have to balance on all these trees and worry about falling and breaking my ankle or anything like that. So I had an idea in my head that I could hike a lot of these ridges, just like I was talking about. I could hike a lot of these ridges and it would take some effort, but I would be able to make it to where I wanted to go in a reasonable amount of time. Well, I came back 3 weeks later and all that snow had melted out. And the areas that had previously been pretty mild were now giant thickets and patches of deadfall. So factor that in as well, depending on when you're hunting during the season. Now, the next lesson I learned has to do with fitness. You may have heard the saying, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. Well, I've adapted that and I say, everybody has a plan until you gain pounds at the waist. You've got to be in shape to make the most of your bear hunt. They live in these mountainous, steep areas, and you may have to hike a ways to find a bear to get into that area where they've found some solitude. And so you just want to be in the best shape as possible. Now, truthfully, I have good genetics and I don't generally have issues with weight gain, but even for myself, someone who's in decent shape, bear hunting was a challenge. Just every day getting up, getting after it on those long days, having the endurance, hiking through that deadfall. I was thankful for every moment of training I had done before that season. And really, I wouldn't have been able to make the most of it if I hadn't been hiking and preparing for the season beforehand. Now, one thing that I did notice is that I hadn't trained enough for steep country. When you're out there climbing hills, your feet are interacting with the slope in a way that makes your calf work while it's lengthened. So you need some ankle flexibility and you're climbing hills, and while you're climbing, your calf is lengthened and it has to be able to contract from that lengthened state. And that feels a little bit different than if you're just walking flat on the ground. And you need some calf strength for it. And that was one thing that I really noticed I was lacking. I had done rucking, I had done cardio, I had been lifting, but I didn't actually get enough steep training in to help develop my lower legs. So since I live in an area with lots of steep country, it's not that hard for me to go on a hike and find something steep. But if you live in an area that's much more flat, you might have to get more creative. So you might want to try out the stair climber at the gym or try some stairs at a building near you. You can also get on an inclined treadmill, and you can do that both going forward and going backward. And even doing a farmer carry on an inclined treadmill, that can be quite a workout. And going backward on an inclined treadmill can actually help to develop and protect your knees. So there's lots you can do with an inclined treadmill, and that actually simulates that motion of climbing a hill a little bit better than a stair climber, because a stair climber allows you to put your foot flat pretty much every time. So that's good for building endurance and building some muscle, but The incline treadmill is actually going to give you that feeling of working with a lengthened calf. One thing that I just found recently is a knees over toes calf raise. And this is maybe the perfect exercise for what I'm talking about. I did it and I thought, this is exactly what I feel when I'm out hiking up a steep hill. So basically, you're going to face a wall, maybe a little bit further than arm's distance away. And then you're going to put your arms in a push-up position, like you're at the bottom of a push-up. And you're going to lean forward to that wall with your hands on the wall. And then you're going to bend your knees so that your knees go just over your toes, in front of your toes, right? And then you're going to do a calf raise. So just bringing your heels straight up off the ground, and make sure that you're not bending your knees more towards the wall. Instead, you want to be bringing your entire body weight up vertically. So the motion is straight up and down, putting your whole body straight up and down instead of forwards and backwards. You will get this burn in your calves, and especially if you try to go down slowly, it's really quite intense, and you may find just how weak your calves are in that position. But that is a great exercise to start training for steep country, and you can even do it on one leg if you want an extra challenge. You can also do step downs where you get up on a stool and then lower one leg slowly to the ground until you touch the ground with your foot, and then bring it back up and then go slowly down. And you're training your knee joint and the muscles around there to have some control when you're going downhill, which in some ways is much more challenging than going uphill because of the stress it can place on your joints. So whatever you're doing to train, make sure to incorporate something that will help to prepare you for steep country. You really don't want to get caught out there with a great aerobic engine, but underdeveloped lower legs that are holding you back. If you really want to get back there into some good bear country, chances are you're going to drive on some old, gnarly logging roads. And something that I learned last season was that you need to bring some loppers at the very least, maybe a chainsaw at the most, because you will run into bushes that can scratch up your car, or even logs that will fall across the road and restrict your access. So this year, I'm going to make sure to bring some loppers for those roads where I just don't want to scratch up the sides of my 4Runner, and also a saw for any bigger obstacles. If you can get a chainsaw, that's great. A handsaw will also work. And especially for all that spring growth that could be crowding the roads, some loppers or some pruning shears are really nice to have as well. Another thing that you want to be prepared for is weather. The spring is an especially volatile time. And last spring bear season, I had instances where I was sitting on the side of the mountain in wind and the freezing cold and very uncomfortable. I had instances where I was hiking in rain for multiple hours. And then I also had instances where I was sunburned and uncomfortable in that way. So you really want to have a kit that's dialed in for any type of weather that you could experience. This will likely include good rain gear. We talked about rain gear a whole lot in the last 2 episodes, so if you want to learn more about rain gear, go check those out. It may also include bringing some sort of tarp that you can set up while you're in the field so you can go the places you want to go, but still stay out of the rain if it decides to storm on you. So think about the different temperatures and different weather conditions that you could be hunting in. In spring, it's almost like nothing is off the table. So you really want to have your kit dialed in, have a good layering system to keep you warm, to keep you out of the sun, to keep you dry while you're out there. The last lesson that I learned that I want to pass on to you today is to check the inside of your clothing for ticks. Ticks are nasty, they spread diseases, they suck your blood. I actually just did an episode on ticks as well, episode 24, if you want to learn more about ticks and how to prevent them from biting you. But one thing that I found super helpful was actually checking the inside of my clothing for ticks. So I would do a tick check and I would look at my skin and I would think, great, there's no ticks here. But then as I'm putting my clothes back on, I would start to find ticks. And what I realized is they were crawling up the inside of my jacket and then chilling there until they had an opportunity to get on my skin. So be diligent, check the inside of your jacket, of your clothing, and make sure that there's no ticks hanging out in there waiting to suck your blood. All right, guys. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you. There's not as much information out there about bear hunting as there is for other animals, so I thought some of this might be useful to anybody else getting after it on a DIY public land bear hunt. I'll keep you updated on the season as we get into it, and hopefully this will be the year that I kill a bear. By the time you're listening to this episode, turkey season will also be underway in most of the country. So if you're interested in chasing turkeys, check out the Intro to Turkey Hunting episodes number 21 through 23. In those episodes, I explain turkey hunting from start to finish. So if you've never done it before or just need a refresher, go check that series out. Thank you so much to everyone who listens to and supports this podcast. I hope you have some awesome adventures this spring. Get out, chase some turkeys, chase some bears, and I'll catch you next week.